Hello and welcome back to Vintage Disney here on Brian Sings Her Cool. Well, we've come a long way since the turn of the century, 20 some odd years ago. Disney remaking their classic animated films as The Cat's Meow Now, and I hear tell there's even more coming. It'll never work. Okay, so we really haven't seen that much change, but one attraction that I've always found inspiring as we look to the future is the Carousel Progress. So let's all dream of a great big beautiful tomorrow as we look back on one of my favorite attractions. Our story begins, as most of them do, in the mind of Walt Disney. As you step through the gates of Disneyland, you're greeted by Main Street, USA, an idealized street influenced by Walt's memories of growing up in Marceline, Missouri. By the late 1950s, Walt was already looking for ways to improve his then brand new theme park Disneyland. An expansion of Main Street was one area that he looked at. With his film adaptation of Johnny Tremaine production, the idea of an annex called Liberty Street was thrown around, as were International Street and Edison Square. One of the ideas for Edison Square was a show called Harnessing Lightning, featuring an audio animatronic man named Wilbur K. Watt, taking you through the history of electricity and beyond, with an emphasis on how the products of sponsor General Electric have benefited us all, of course. As each set piece ended, the audience would get up and walk to the next part. As the expansion idea was dropped, so was Harnessing the Lightning, but GE was still very interested. As the 1964 World's Fair approached, GM came to Walt to ask if he'd develop a show for their pavilion, with the offer to fund any new technology. Needless to say, Walt jumped at the chance. Between dropping plans for Main Street's expansion and now, Walt's Imagineers had perfected audio animatronics, allowing them to not only fully develop what would become Carousel Progress, but another attraction for the fair as well: Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. Carousel Progress took its inspiration from old industrial films that were funded by appliance manufacturers to show consumers how much easier it would be with their products. There were also elements taken from Chicago's 1933 Century of Progress exhibition. Improving upon the original idea of multiple sets with audiences walking from stage to stage, Imagineers Bob Gurr and Roger E. Broggie thought up the idea of a carousel-like theater for smoother transitions between parts of the show. Both men had backgrounds in developing vehicles for Disneyland and movie special effects, with Gurr even consulting on the construction of the T-Rex for 1993's Jurassic Park. As the ideas grew, Wilbur K. Watt would lose the gig and the show would focus on a typical American family and the ever-changing technology in their everyday life. Singing cowboy star Rex Allen was asked to voice John and did so until 1975 when Andrew Duggan took over, until he too was replaced in 1993 by Christmas Story writer Gene Shepard. However, Rex Allen was given a cameo as Grandpa in the final scene. Having gone to Walt Disney World every year as a kid, I experienced a lot of the changes to Carousel Progress firsthand, so I figured the best way to look at these changes was to take you through the show itself. As the doors open and the audience makes their way into the theater, they're given a brief introduction giving background on the attraction. Then the theme song plays as the theater begins to rotate into the first act. We begin our journey on Valentine's Day, right around the turn of the 20th century, when we meet our host, John. John marvels at all the new technology, like phonographs, horseless trolleys, and scoffs at the idea of these two brothers in North Carolina trying to build a flying machine. We also meet John's wife Sarah, his daughter Patricia, played by Jimmy Neutron voice actress Debbie Derryberry, as she's getting ready for the Valentine's Day dance, and his son James, who in a rather risque plot point is checking out his father's stereoscope images of a belly dancer named Little Egypt. Granted, not many kids know what a stereoscope is, and I only really know about Little Egypt because Elvis had a song by that name. If we're to believe that this is the same family throughout each scene, where did that little girl go? Disney is known for spending big money, but they should be commended for, at times, being rather thrifty. Disney reuses the molds of their animatronics. The grandmother in the first scene can also be found in the ballroom scene of the Haunted Mansion, sitting in a rocking chair. Patricia can be seen in the Renaissance scene of Epcot Spaceship Earth, playing violin alongside John, who is playing the lute. With inventions like airplanes, telephones, and light bulbs, I've always found this era in American history to be one of the most exciting. And John and his family offer a nice little window into this period. The theme song plays again as we move ahead to our next scene, set in the 1920s. Independence Day in the roaring 1920s. John greets us again from his kitchen, this time strung up with electric wires. John lets us know how much has changed in 20 short years. Cars have new electric starters, meaning you don't have to crank anymore. Charles Lindbergh is preparing to fly over the Atlantic, and Al Jolson is coming out with a new talking picture called The Jazz Singer. It's also in this act we meet Uncle Orville, sitting in a bathtub with a fan rigged up in front of a block of ice, blowing on him. John says he calls it air cooling.
No privacy at all around this place.
Sorry, Orville.
Orville is voiced by voice acting legend Mel Blanc. This marking the first and only time you'd actually hear Blanc's voice coming out of a Disney character, as he had originally provided the voice of Honest John's sidekick Gideon in Pinocchio, but most of his work was cut out except for 3 hiccups.
No, stupid. Don't be crude.
The 20s was another fascinating point in our history, though admittedly the aspects I find most interesting probably wouldn't fly in a Disney attraction. What, no references to bootleg gin, flappers, and Al Capone? Jumping ahead another 20 years, John again greets us from his kitchen, this time set on Halloween in the 1940s. As a lover of Halloween and a fan of 40s and 50s style designs, this is my favorite act of the show. This gorgeous kitchen set features all sorts of innovations, like an electric refrigerator. Even though General Electric dropped its sponsorship in 1986, you can still see the GE logo on a few products throughout the show, including that fridge. I guess we can thank Uncle Orville for that air cooling.
No privacy at all around this place.
We get to see an early television, and even a reference to Universal Monsters, as John's son is shown in his werewolf costume with a photo of Lon Chaney Jr. proudly displayed on his bulletin board. As we're left pondering how anyone thought that exercise machine Patty's using would help you lose weight, we make a big jump from the 1940s to the present day. The original final scene in both the World's Fair version and the Disneyland version was Christmas in the home of the 1960s. Disneyland, however, removed references to General Electric's Medallion Home campaign heard in the World's Fair version. When the attraction came to Walt Disney World in the 1970s, its final scene was New Year's Eve in the home of the 1970s.
Grandpa, progress for people has always been the real challenge, in every generation.
I agree, Dad. When we have the most problems, that's when we seem to make the most progress.
Well then, sonny boy.
This was changed in 1981 to reflect New Year's Eve in the home of the 1980s.
Now is the best time of your life.
You know, Grandma, she's right. We've seen a lot of New Year's come and go, and we've shared the good old days. But I admit, the time we live in really is the best time.
Yes, this is the best time. One of the reasons is because electricity has improved all our lives.
Then in 1993, the attraction decided to go back to its roots, and we find our family once again celebrating Christmas with Grandma and Grandpa. As I said before, Grandpa is voiced by the original John, Rex Allen, and Grandma is Janet Waldo, who Hanna-Barbera fans may recognize as the voice of Judy Jetson. It's hard to represent the present in a show as long-running as Carousel Progress. And certainly the final act has seen a number of updates since the attraction's inception. Changing technologies and fashions will always creep up and make it look incredibly dated, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I suppose they could have set it in the future and given us something more like what Horizons did, but there's a charm to seeing the family showcase virtual reality video games in their big early 90s rugby sweaters. Sadly, there has been a recent update to the family's fashion choices that do, however, include Easter eggs, like the son wearing a Mineral King ski resort hoodie, a reference to a failed project Walt was planning at the time of his death. And the father now wears an apron that reads, "My Food Rocks," which is a reference to the closed Epcot attraction, Food Rocks.
Come on and hit him with a classic, Richard.
I look to the east, I look to the west, and everywhere the food tastes best to the food. Oh, rude.
The final scene gives us a number of Disney's famed hidden Mickeys. Check out the Mickey Nutcracker on the mantle, the Mickey Peppermill in the kitchen. There's also a plush Mickey Mouse among the presents. If you look at the bulletin board, there's a note stating, "Grandma and Grandpa, Flight 1964 arrives 10:01. Flight 1964, of course, is a reference to 1964, the year the attraction opened at the World's Fair, and 10:01 references the date that Carousel Progress opened at the Magic Kingdom. There's also a note saying, "Marty called, wants changes." This is a reference to Marty Sklar, who designed each scene of the attraction. Walt once said, "I love the nostalgic myself. I hope we never lose some things of the past." Carousel Progress was part nostalgia, part futurism, and it needed a theme song that would fully embrace Walt's optimistic outlook. And no one was more suited for that job than the Sherman Brothers. After the attraction's successful run at the World's Fair, and equally successful run at Disneyland, General Electric started to feel that they weren't getting the most for their continued sponsorship. GE noted that most Californians were seeing the show because they loved it, and not necessarily because they were GE customers. Also, by that time, Disney had built Walt Disney World in Florida. So on September 9th, 1973, Disneyland closed the attraction and packed up for the East Coast on GE's urging. With the move came changes to the show. Some of them were understandable, as certain elements had become outdated. But one change proved unpopular with the original's creators. GE declared the original theme song, "There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow," no longer represented their brand. The president of GE came to the Sherman Brothers and said, "I don't want to talk about tomorrows. I want to talk about today. I want to talk about what now is all about." The Sherman Brothers, who wrote the original based on Walt's outlook on life, deeply resented making the change, but complied and came up with "The Best Time of Your Life." Character actor Andrew Duggan sang the song for this incarnation of the attraction, which ran from 1973 to 1993. General Electric dropped its sponsorship in 1986. Thus, in 1993, we would see a major refurbishment. This update would mimic the original version's non-commercial messaging, and with it, the original theme song came back. Providing John's new singing voice, oddly enough, was voice actor Jess Harnell, the voice of Wacko Warner on Animaniacs. Jess also provided the voice for a number of characters on the Splash Mountain ride, as well as providing a live-action cameo in 2003's The Country Bears.
In a band called the Country Bears.
Woo! Bears rock!
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my look at Carousel Progress. If you would like to be kept up to date as to when I release a new video, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and if you really want to be notified, hit that bell as well. I'm Brian, and I'll see you next time.